Lecture 14, Conflict Management Styles. If we manage conflict constructively, we harness its energy for creativity and development. Now, conflict is one of those words that tends to have a negative connotation. If you remember from our discussion on perception, we talked about how some words sort of feel different to different people. And there's kind of a subjective meaning behind those words. Now, conflict is definitely one of those words that has a strong feeling attached to it. And we often think of conflict as purely negative and to be avoided if at all possible. However, conflict can actually be quite useful and beneficial to a relationship. The key is to understand the nature of the conflict and then to manage it effectively. So, as I usually do, I like to start by understanding the basics. Let's first go to the fundamental aspect of conflict and then build from there. So we first need to define conflict on its own. Now, one definition, because there are many, was provided by Wilmot and Hawker, and this states that conflict is an expressed struggle between at least two interdependent parties who perceive incompatible goals, scarce resources, and interference from others in achieving their goals. And this is a pretty good kind of cohesive definition of conflict that you could find in virtually any communication textbook or research paper. So there, if you look at that definition, if you read through it carefully, you're going to see 5 major parts to the definition, which basically explain conflict in a little bit more detail. So let's look at those 5 parts. Number 1, you have to have at least 2 people. Now, for our purposes, we're talking about intrapersonal conflict or maybe even small group conflict. This doesn't really pertain to intrapersonal conflict, meaning conflict within the self. However, some of the tactics that we're going to go through today, particularly the conflict resolution stages, will really be valuable no matter what type of conflict you are involved in, what kind of relationship, or if you're dealing with something just personal. However, as I said, this class is interpersonal, so we are looking at a conflict between at least 2 people. So you have to have at least 2 people. Number 2, it has to be interdependent parties involved in the conflict. So this means that the people involved in that particular conflict rely on each other in some way. So without this reliance, there would really likely be no conflict because there's no need for each other. So for some reason, you are relying on that person, whether it's to get a job done, to financially back you, emotional support, whatever it might be. You have some sort of interdependence, and they in turn obviously rely on you, which helps to explain what interdependence means. So interdependent parties. So you have to have at least 2 people and interdependent parties. The number 3, you have to have incompatible goals. So each member has something that they desire that they feel they cannot have if the other member involved gets what they want. So it's incompatible. If I get what I want, you can't have what you want. If you get what you want, I can't have what I want, and vice versa. So incompatible goals. Number 4, scarce resources. So those involved in the conflict each want the same thing, but feel it's not possible for both to acquire it. And then interference from others. So interference from others can really be a variety of situations. It can be a third party, it can be interference from just that person that you are in conflict with, or multiple people. So what one wants, what you want, is perceived as impossible with another's involvement. And that may stem back to those incompatible goals or even scarce resources. Maybe you feel like there's only so much that's available. And keep in mind that scarce resources doesn't necessarily mean something concrete. We're not talking about lack of oil, although that is definitely an issue. We might be talking about money, so it could be something physical like that. We have a lack of resources financially. Maybe it is a lack of attention. The children often feel this way, that they, if they have siblings, that they are competing for their parents' attention. It could be presentation time. It could be all kinds of different things. It's just scarce resources of one kind or another. So like I said, these interferences from others could be connected back to the incompatible goals and scarce resources. You may have noticed quite a few words in those explanations like perceived and think or feel. Now, one thing to consider is that many times conflict can be avoided if only we took the time to go through even the first stage of conflict resolution, which we're going to look at here in a second in this graphic. And then we actually effectively defined conflict. Oftentimes we are feeling or thinking or even just perceiving things to be a certain way without really dipping into it into detail and fully comprehending what's going on. So our goals can become compatible, we can share resources, or even eliminate the perception of interference if we took some time to fully understand why we are in this particular conflict. So let's take a look at this conflict resolution stage. This is one of those things that, as I mentioned earlier, can apply to both an interpersonal or group problem conflict as well as an intrapersonal conflict. You can absolutely attempt this in an intrapersonal manner rather than just interpersonal. So let's look at the steps. There are 5 steps to the conflict resolution stages. First step is to define the conflict. I'm sure this sounds familiar from past lectures, especially the most previous one, but also that this is something, again, back to the fundamentals. Define the conflict. It sounds very easy to define what you're upset about or what is that scarce resource or incompatible goal. However, oftentimes we think we are in conflict about one thing, but we're really not. There's more to it than that. So you need to figure out what the issues are. What are the issues that are involved, that are connected in some way to the emotion or to the conflict of interest or to some kind of whatever the conundrum might be. So what are the issues? And what do you need to do with this? First, make sure you're staying in the present. You're not going back in time and remembering all the negatives and accusing that person. It really doesn't help in any circumstance to go back in time unless you're trying to show a trend. In that case, that might be possible. But if you're going back in time just to kind of character bash, then it doesn't help. Avoid mind reading. This is something I have a hard time with because I like to understand every aspect of a situation. So I might project what I think a person is feeling onto what they're saying. So I don't actually know exactly what they're thinking, but I try to imagine what they are feeling and what they're thinking. And I have to be careful not to make that concrete. I can empathize. As it says here, I can empathize. I can say, all right, so you're saying that you feel this way. And I feel for you because I understand that. But I don't want to project my own definitions, my own explanations onto that person without fully understanding their side. So really define the conflict. Make sure you know exactly what the issue is all about. Step 2, examine possible solutions. So come up with a list of solutions. This is very similar to how you would go about decision making in a small group. Come up with a list of solutions. And once you have a pretty good list, I would say 2 or 3 or 4 really are all the max that you need unless you've got a variety of options. What do you need to do? Brainstorm some of the basics. Don't censor the other person. Actually, this is real key. A lot of times we want to come up with a solution. We want the solution to be ours, our doing, our idea. Don't censor your partner. Allow them to participate in the examining of possible solutions. Really allow this to be a win-win situation where you're both involved. If you are the one projecting the solution, likely the person on the opponent side of this is not going to be as receptive to it. So you want this to be win-win. You want everybody to be involved and each to come out with something. Next, look at the costs and rewards. This is kind of going back to that social exchange theory that we talked about a while ago. What are the costs of each solution? What are the benefits? What are the rewards? And those together, do you get a positive or a negative outcome? So examine those possible solutions very thoroughly. Then pick one. Pick a solution and test it. That's the third step. What do? You're going to test the solution mentally. So walk it through your head. See, okay, if I do this, if we do this, what would it potentially look like? Now, you're not saying this is exactly what's going to happen, but here's what the likely result would be. Or there's a good chance it would end up looking like this. If that seems kind of positive to you, put the solution into practice. Now, once you have tested that solution, you can go to step 4, which is to evaluate the solution. So, did it work? Did that solution fit the way you expected it to up here in the testing the solution step? So, did that solution work? Step 5 would be your final process. It's the final move. Are you going to accept or are you going to reject that solution? Did the solution work or did it not, basically? If you accept the solution, okay, I tried this, we decided on this solution and it worked, great. Exit the conflict is complete. If you reject it, then you have to move back a couple steps. And it may be just that, well, maybe I rejected it, but I need to think about it again. So let's just move back to step 4 and evaluate the solution one more time. Or maybe you really do need to test it. Maybe you tested it at a bad time. I mean, have you ever imagined when you were a kid having a conversation with a parent and you know that you got to talk to them about something you did wrong or something that you need money for, and you talk to them and it just turned out that it was a really bad time to have that conversation. Maybe they just had to pay a huge bill, or they were exhausted from a horrible day at work and you told them what you did wrong at school. Maybe it was just bad timing and you need to go back and start over. So go back to step 3 and test the solution. Or maybe you need to come up with some more solutions. Maybe the ones you picked just aren't working and you need to think about it a little bit more. Or finally, maybe you need to go all the way back up to step 1 and really consider the conflict. I have an example of something that I use in some of my other classes about 2 sisters who are fighting over an orange. Both want this orange. The conflict is that there is a scarce resource that is this orange. And they sit down together and they say, hey, look, here's the conflict. You want the orange and I want the orange. What are we going to do? They come up with possible solutions. Well, I can have the orange this time. Next time we have an orange, you can have it. We could split the orange in half. Anything. But none of the solutions actually makes them very happy, you know. They end up deciding, well, let's just cut the orange in half. Step 3, they test the solution. They cut the orange in half and each gets a piece. Step 4 is they evaluate the solution. Well, the sister 1 wanted the orange for orange juice, but she only got half an orange, so she didn't get very much orange juice, and she's kind of bummed about that. Sister 2 needed the orange zest for a cake that she was making, and she needed the entire orange to make the appropriate amount of zest, so it wasn't as flavorful as she had originally wanted. So they're evaluating the solution, and they both reject it. They did not enjoy it. What they needed to do was go back to step 1 and redefine the conflict. Really look at why it is that each one of them wanted the orange. I know this is cheesy. I know this is a dumb example, but it really does apply to other situations. It isn't just, I want the orange, you want the orange. If you explain your side thoroughly, hey, here's what I want the orange for, and here's why. And the other sister does it the same way, you would understand that, well, only one of them wanted the juice and one of them wanted the peel. So just peel the thing and give the sister that wants the zest the peel, and give the sister that wants the juiced orange. So it's really something that could have been easily resolved for that win-win solution if you really understood the conflict. So pardon my rant, but that's a great example of how defining the conflict can really make a big difference. So now that we understand what conflict is, let's look at some possible ways to manage conflict. There are many ways that we can choose to manage conflict, and some methods are more effective than others, depending upon a circumstance. So take a minute and listen to the brief explanation of each of the conflict management styles below, and then go and check out the PowerPoint that is associated with conflict management. This is going to show you which situations would benefit from each style and when not to use that particular style of conflict. Plus, you will find that you're likely to get to experience a conflict management quiz in the discussion rooms. So let's look at some of these styles. This is the ways people tend to manage conflict. First one is collaborating, and this is your win-win. I juice the orange and then I give you the peel. We each win. It often involves both sides very honestly, very honestly articulating, so laying out clearly what it is they want, and then prioritizing their respective preferences. So maybe I need this thing, but I need it maybe next week, and you need it today. Okay? So really articulating and prioritizing their respective preferences in order to find a solution that is mutually satisfactory. This is not a give and take. This is not I give a little, you give a little, and then I lose out a little and you lose out a little. It's not a compromise. Everybody walks away equally happy. This is not a debate in which you have to lose a little bit to gain a little bit. In a collaborating style, it's very difficult. You each have to work really hard to fully understand and articulate what's going on. And not every situation benefits from this style. But there are many circumstances where this is exactly what you want. It's hard, and the more people involved, the more difficult it becomes. But especially if it is a valuable relationship, one that you don't want to lose, like a spouse, a best friend, a sibling, a child, you really want to try for this style in as many situations as is possible. So collaborating is kind of that best style for those good, strong relationships. Competing style is next. Competing style is very much an authoritarian approach to problems, and it usually involves only one side getting their say. It is very goal-oriented. It's very quick. Most of the times when we're referring to everyday conflict with a significant other or people that depend on you, like coworkers, you don't want to use competing style. However, there are circumstances where competing style might be valuable. If you think about it, let's imagine you're in an emergency situation. You don't want to sit there and debate about what to do. You just make a decision. Somebody takes the lead and is a competing style. They say, hey, here's what we're doing. This is exactly what we're going to have happen. So there are terms in which this is good. Another one might be if you are told as an employer to make cuts. You can't really collaborate as easily as you would be able to if it was a less harsh situation. So competing might be a good role for that one. Next is avoiding style. This is a very non-confrontational approach. You've got your head in the sand. It doesn't exist. There is no conflict. There is no conflict. There is no conflict. Very passive behavior. Sometimes you even physically or at least mentally withdraw from the conversation. It could be that you walk out of the room, or it could be that you just won't talk about it anymore. When my husband and I were newly married, he used the verbal withdrawal. So he just wouldn't talk about it anymore. He wouldn't leave the room, but he wouldn't talk about it anymore. Doesn't matter what I said, he would not continue the conversation. So a verbal withdrawal or a physical withdrawal. They literally walk out of the room. Maybe sidestepping, you step around the issue. This is usually a tactic used when somebody's uncomfortable, not necessarily just unhappy, but uncomfortable. Or complete silence. They won't say a single word to you. It is that literal silent treatment. Again, most of the time you want to avoid avoiding style. However, there are some circumstances when this is valuable. If you are struggling with a situation that's incredibly complex, or very highly emotional and needs some cooling down time or needs some thoughtful time, avoiding might be appropriate as long as you come back to it. So avoiding style is another one. And then we have our harmonizing style. So this is where you give in to others or you smooth things over in order to maintain relationships and create unity. I tend to do this as well. I like when everybody gets along. So I will sacrifice what I want or what I'm thinking for the good of everybody getting along. And I will try to make everyone happy. Try to help them to see all sides so that everyone is content. And that is useful in some circumstances and absolutely horrible in others. You can get stepped on doing that. And it's your fault. It's not anybody else's fault because you're the one pulling back from your desires. So you have to be careful with harmonizing style. And then finally, we have the one that most people think of, especially in workplace situations, and that's compromising style. This is where conflicts are worked out by finding some middle ground. If you've ever been involved in a union negotiation or vacation planning, you may have found yourself in compromising style. So people say, all right, well, we can do this on this day, and then we're going to go here to my place on the next day. Or if you've been in a negotiation for a contract, you know that there's tons of give and take. You have to sacrifice some of your goals in order to gain others. Okay? So these are the most common styles of conflict management. Again, that's collaborating, competing, avoiding, harmonizing, and compromising. See once you take the quiz what style you tend to be. And then if you have a moment, check out this clip from The Waterboy. I know it's a classic and many of you have seen it or at least heard of it. It's only 2 minutes and you can find it on YouTube very easily. And tell me, what style of conflict resolution does The Waterboy use? Thank you so much.